Well, welcome. Fantastic to be together again. Lynn, you made the big trip. What a champion, hey? Good on you. Kids, you can go. Thanks, Heather, for sharing this morning. That was very encouraging. Yeah, fantastic. I think that this morning I would like to begin with telling you a joke, but starting with the punchline, just to be different. So, Nick, you'll appreciate that way around, won't you? You like it the other way, but we're just going to do it this way this morning, right? So, this is the punchline. A mother answered her daughter and said to her, well, it's very simple. I told you about my side of the family, and your dad was talking about his side of the family. Now, that's the punchline. So here's the joke. This little girl went up to her mum one day and she says, Mum, how'd the human race begin? And her mum says, well, God created Adam and Eve, and Adam and Eve had children, and then they had children, and that's where we came from. Well, the next day, she asked her dad, same question. And he said, well, long time ago, there were these monkeys. And you're getting ahead of me, And so we came from monkeys. Now, this confused this little girl. So she went back to her mum and she said, Mum, you told me God created us, but Dad says we came from monkeys. And here's the punchline. Her mother said to her, I was telling you about my side of the family, and your dad was talking about his side of the family. I want to do the same thing this morning with a Bible narrative, right? So I want us to look at a historic Bible narrative, and it's about a battle between two nations, and it's an interesting battle because it's only fought between two people. And some of you might start to even work this out as we go along. One of them was just a very young teenager called David. And the other was this great big overgrown bag of ferret's breath called Goliath. Yep. And it was this battle where the winner takes all. And so in this story, Goliath gets hit with a stone in the head. David runs up, grabs Goliath's sword, cuts off Goliath's head with his own sword, grabs his head and takes it back to Jerusalem. Like, sweet dreams, children. You know, it's like, I think the problem with hearing that story as a child, it should be in the MA section of the Bible anyway, but that when you hear that story as a child, I don't think you actually get to understand the power of the story. I think you miss the power of the story. And see, the point that I'm trying to make is that when you know the punchline to that story, when you know what happened, it's like a joke you've heard a few times and someone tries to tell you, you lose interest because you think you know what's coming. And so this morning, I want to just mess with you, just for a little bit. I want to give a new punchline to the story of David and Goliath, one you may not have heard before. And I have one purpose, so that we can take from this story something that will actually help our lives. We've just done this series on making better choices and living with fewer regrets. And if you've missed any one of those 5 questions you can ask yourself when you're trying to make decisions, go back and look at the last 5 weeks. It's there online. And the reason I say that is because within those 5 weeks that we've done are tools that will help you, that will make a difference to your life. I don't do 3-point sermons. I struggle remembering 1 point. And I don't think we remember points, but I think if we can get a concept into us, a concept we can apply to any situation we come across in life. Like, for example, when we were doing the series on making better decisions, a question you can ask yourself is, am I telling myself the truth? Am I being honest with myself? Really? That concept can change how you make decisions in your life. Now, you've already heard the story of David and Goliath, and the problem is I doubt that you even have found a way that you could apply that to your life. So I'm just going to ask you, from what you know of the story of David and Goliath, is there anything in that story that you've applied to your life that's made a significant difference to your life? Yeah? Andy?
Just one.
Yep.
And you're never going to be as big as the big guys.
Okay.
Of course, some pretty vital hits if you focus on what you're doing and focus.
Okay, yep.
I think facing the fears. Goliath is a massive big.
So Goliath represents all our fears, all that big scary stuff in our life. Yep. And so there will be some things you've taken out of it, like even about when he didn't take on Saul's armour, about being yourself. But see, you could get that from a self-help book. In fact, our world, our culture worships the idea of being an individual and not letting someone conform to you. So what you've shared is significant, but I think that most of us miss the really big concept in the story. And in fact, you can even hear the story and feel guilty because in your life, there are still giants. There's things like depression that you're facing. There's loneliness, there's financial pressures, there's relationship struggles. And you think, well, I've got this giant, I've got this thing, and it's just not going away. And you can actually even start to feel like the underdog, that everything's against you. And you may have been praying and asking God to help you, but it's like nothing's changing. Now, our culture has this metaphor about a David and Goliath battle. And it sort of represents the little guy against the big guy. It's when you don't expect the sports team to win, and it's a David and Goliath battle. And the reason our world uses that as a metaphor is because they got it from Christians. Because most Christians believe that David was the underdog. This teenage kid against this seasoned warrior, this gladiator. There's different opinions as to how big the Bible says, but it uses old school measurements. And so people have different ideas how big Goliath was. But he was big, like really, really big. And he came with a most high-tech weaponry and high-tech armour. Like he had a sword and he had this really big spear, but then he had this other spear that he tucked down here, and when he threw it, it was like on a bungee rope. It was on a string, and when you fired it, if you missed someone, you just pulled the string back and you had another go at them without getting close to them. Like, he had the latest technology. He was 3,000 years ahead of Ned Kelly. Like, what Ned Kelly had in his armour was very agricultural. And Ned forgot about his legs, had them shot from under him. Not Goliath. He had Kevlar, bronze legging things that protected even his legs. But if you think that David was the underdog, that's actually a problem. Because David was not only the most likely to win, he was guaranteed to win. He wasn't going up as the 100-to-1 outside unlikely winner. In fact, when David left the Israelite camp to head towards Goliath, King Saul had sent him. King Saul was a smart man. King Saul was a seasoned veteran in how you do warfare. And he sent him believing that David would win. You don't send someone out to represent your nation if the stakes are so high that if he loses, you're all going to become slaves of the Philistines. You don't do that. You only send out someone you believe is going to win. And it's really easy to criticise Saul and say, well, he was the leader, he was the king, he was taller than anyone else, and he should have gone. He should have been out there. But see, Saul's smart enough to know that he can't go one-on-one with with Goliath and win. He can't. He was not strong enough. He was not able to fight Goliath on his terms. But see, David didn't try to fight Goliath on Goliath's terms. David took a gun to a knife fight. He just never told Goliath he'd changed the rules. He didn't tell him what he was about to do. But David had skills that Saul didn't. It's why David was the right person to go. The only one who thought that David would not win was his older brother who had some attitude problems, and Goliath himself. And they were both wrong. If you see yourself as the underdog in life, that you're up against things that are just too big, these giants in your life, perhaps you're listening to the wrong voices. Perhaps that way of thinking has set you up with false expectations of what you think God should do, what you think a miracle in your life would actually look like. And it can set you up to feel disappointed with God, to even feel ticked off with God. And I understand why people get to that place, especially if in the story of David you think that the miracle happened when that stone hit Goliath. If you think that's when the miracle happened, I can understand why you can get disappointed with God. So I have a question for you. Why did Goliath lose? And why did David win? And if your answer is because God gave David the victory, that's the wrong answer. Well, technically it's not the wrong answer, but it's an answer that won't actually help you. It won't change your life if you think that God just gave David the victory. And I know that's sounding, I know Nick's looking a bit puzzled there, right? So we're going to come back to this, Nick. Just stay with us.
I always look like this.
You always look like that. It's a concentration, Nick. It's a concentration, right? Yeah. So I want us to have a re-look at this story so you can understand why I'm saying what I'm saying. So Theo, can you give me a hand there for a sec? Thanks. So I've created a little scene for you. That's right. It's hard to drive these things. Actually, I'll stick this to the side. Thanks, Theo. Yep, that'll be great. So David arrives at the front line and he's bringing supplies to his brothers, right? He's too young to fight. I love it when God gets us where he needs us to be when we're not expecting. When Heather shared her story, she never knew that day that she would get to be exactly in the right spot, in the right moment, for someone to offer her something that's been the longing of her heart and to set up all her answers. And God did that. And he did it with David this day. And he gets there just in time to hear this huge big man come and do the Anthony Mundine show. Like he arrives, Goliath is bigger than Anthony Mundine, but he's got the same mouth and he's got the same arrogance. And when we put our trust and our faith in ourselves, other people, technology, anything other than God, we'll either become arrogant and self-confident, over-the-top confident, or we'll live in fear. We can never get this pendulum. in the right spot. It'll either be swinging to overconfidence or fear. Goliath had the overconfidence bit. And David hears Goliath throw down this challenge. There's been a 40-day stalemate, mate. There's the Israelites on this side, and there's the Philistines on this side. And this morning and night, Goliath stand there chucking out this challenge, right? Neither side want to go down into the valley and up the other side because the other side's got the hill advantage. So it's a stalemate. Nothing's happening. And David hears Goliath, but then David hears as a reward. You get the gold, you get the girl, and you pay no taxes for the person that kills Goliath. And this grabs his attention, and he keeps asking this question. He just keeps turning to one person or another. Now, tell me again. I get the gold, I get the girl, and I pay no taxes. And he keeps asking it because he wants to be sure that that's what's going to happen. It's captured his attention. David began wanting to leave here and come to Goliath, in a sense, we would think for the wrong reasons. He began wanting to do that for the money and the sex. That was his motivation. And I think sometimes in church life, we can become too concerned about why someone is doing what they're doing, why someone's serving on a camera, why Sam wants to stand there and look like he's at the snowfields. Like, we can look at people's motives and think, that's not pure enough. But you know what? I don't think God's sometimes that worried where we start. It's where we get to, where we finish. And I remember a number of years ago in our youth ministry here in Bairnsdale, it was that time when you prayed for people, it's like the power of God just came upon anyone you prayed for and they just dropped to the spot. And we're praying for all these youth kids this night, and all these kids are going choo, 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 down as we prayed for them. And we're seeing this as God's doing something in their life. But they're these two Koori teenagers. And as I prayed for them, they're sort of looking at each other and they're sort of giggling a little bit, and they both put themselves down on the floor. God wasn't in it, I'm telling you. They put themselves down there. And they're lying on the floor, on their backs, looking at each other every now and then, having a laugh. Well, after a few minutes, one of the kids got up and went outside. Half an hour later, one Koori boy is lying on the floor, eyes closed. I start to see tears coming to the side of his face. See, he began with the wrong motives. That's not where he ended. He ended up with a God encounter, lying on a floor. That's not where he started. And I think God's sometimes more committed to getting us somewhere than how we start. Great movies begin with a storyline where the main character moves and grows, and they change through the story. They get better. And by the final scene, we see the gold in this person. Well, David began with, tell me about the gold and the girl, and I pay no taxes. But by the time he got to be downhill from Goliath, he says, you come against me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, all your high-tech stuff, right? All your strength, that's how you come to me. But I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, whom, like underlined by the way, you've defied. So what happened between this side of the valley and here? What happened to change David from this to that? Well, I think there are two things that happened. When he went to Saul to convince Saul that he was the person, that he had the skills to do this, he started talking to Saul about past victories, things that he'd previously done in his long life of 16 years, whatever he was, right? But he said, I've killed a lion and bear. I've got them stuffed. They're hanging on my wall at home, you know. And he talked about these things. And as he talked about them, it reminded him of God's faithfulness, of what God had done for him. If you will fight the lion and the bear in your life with no one watching, God will give you a Goliath to kill with the whole world watching. And I'm thankful right now in my life that I've killed some lion and bears with no one watching. And you don't need to know some of the battles that I've overcome, but it's for your benefit. It's always for someone else's benefit. The battles we fight that others don't see, it's not just for us. David wasn't going out there just for himself. It was to save a nation from going into slavery. And you have children. You have a legacy. You have a story to tell. And it makes such a difference when we fight the things that others don't see. And it gives us a God perspective, and that's what David had. And it builds faith within us, doesn't it? When you remember back to the faithful things God's done in your life, it helps to build faith for the next steps. But faith got David into the battle. It was his skill that finished what God had started. So if you had been trying to sling one of those things around and hit Goliath, it would have been a miracle if it had even gone in the right direction. But not David. See, David expected to hit what he's aiming at. My brother Jeff and I these days, we get paid by Parks Victoria, go up in sensitive habitat areas in national parks and after the fires and stuff, and cull feral deer in those areas. And the reason they pay us is because they expect us to hit what we're aiming, because we're good at what we do. Like 2 weeks ago, we were up around Bindi Station and Jeff and I, between us, 9 shots, 9 deer, and recovered all the meat. To miss would be unusual. Jeff and I would expect each of us to hit what we're doing. David expected to hit what he was going to aim at. So where's the God factor? Where's the miracle? Where does the miracle take place? Well, I want to show you where the miracle took place. It wasn't here, and it wasn't here. It was down in here. It's when David picked up 5 smooth stones. David made the slingshot, and he's the one who practiced. He was the one who got very competent and consistent with his accuracy and his skills with this weapon. Don't miss this. It was God who made the stones. It was God that made the ammunition for him to take down Goliath with. When David turned up on the front line, he had a bag. And in that bag was food for his brothers. You don't walk the distance he'd had with a bag full of rocks. And by the time he'd given his bag to his brothers, his bag was empty. You don't just find the sort of smooth, round stone that David needed up on a hill. You only find it down the valley. And so David reached down and he found a smooth stone. And then he kept searching and he found another one. And then he found another one. These are getting heavy. And another one. and another one. And he put these 5 stones in his bag. Now, it's true that David only used 1 stone. Bless you. But it was really, really important that each of these 5 stones was as perfectly built as the next one, that weighed the same amount. Because when you practice, you know how much weight's in 1 stone. And they've got to be aerodynamically, that's not a good stone. And because he was trying to have a surprise element with Goliath, he took his stick. If you can remember in the story, Goliath goes, "What am I, a dog? You come up with me with a boy and a stick?" The stick, you know when those magicians they sort of sleight of hand, or they get you to look that way and they do something this way. David took a stick and confused Goliath. He didn't come swinging this thing. He had 5 stones in here, and when he was going to grab 1 stone, he didn't have a chance to go, hang on, that one's not as good as this one. They had to be the same. They had to be equally as good. He only needed 1, but if he'd taken just 1, that's arrogance. That's overconfidence. Faith meant he took 5, because he knew that if 4 didn't hit, 1 would do the job. So he grabs these 5 stones. Now, I've got a photo I want to put up. Can we put that up on the screen, thanks? Can you see that? Yeah, just put that back on the side. Yep, thanks. That's the Mitchell River. Now, I knew a spot where I could find these 5 stones. And I went there yesterday. And that's a little spot in the river where I got these stones. I knew where to go. And I timed myself how long it would take me to get these 5 stones. It took me 10 minutes. Now, no human being put those stones there for David. God placed them there. They weren't just in a little pile waiting for him. He had to find them. I don't know how long it took him to find them, but the stones he found, God had been preparing for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. I don't know how long it takes to make a stone round like that. But God did, and God had them ready there for him when a young teenager would need them, when a nation would need these stones. That's the miracle. It's God's provision ahead of the need. God had been working on those stones. If there had not been water in that valley, rolling those stones, working on those stones over years and years and years, David would have had no ammo. Doesn't matter how much skill he had. The miracle was in the provision in the moment. 5 smooth stones. Everything else David could do. But David couldn't make the stones, and neither can you and I. Here's the thing. Before you ever know you have a need, God has already created the answer. Before you pray that first prayer in desperation, God has already prepared the answer. The way forward, the way out. God has that for you, the strategy. He does it in advance. My younger brother Ken, when his 10-year-old son was growing up, Ken could see that his son had a heart for God and he wanted to foster it. So what he did was he signed up to go on a trip to Africa with Marilyn Hickey in this big boat, and they travelled up the coast of Africa, and they went into different villages and towns to pray for people and see God do incredible things. So my brother Ken had this heart to do this, felt God was in it. He needed $10,000. And he'd managed to get a certain amount of the money, but he's about $3,000 short. And so he believed God would supply the money and it would come in the mailbox. And every day he would go to the mailbox looking for a cheque. It never came. He's trusting God. It never came. But one night I was going through Melbourne. I called into his place late one night, and he told me about this and the frustration he felt, and he knew God was in this, but just nothing was happening, and he's trusting God. And I said to him, well, I remember when I was 17 and Dad thought I was going to kill myself before I was 18. He thought, well, I've got to cover his funeral. So he took out an insurance policy to cover my funeral with AMP. And every year Dad paid this $26 at whatever to cover my funeral. Well, then eventually AMP went on the stock exchange. They floated the company and they gave everyone shares that had a policy, a life policy with them. And by now, it's in my name. I'm paying the $26 a year. And I get these shares in AMP. Well, I cashed them in. I got about $3,000. And I said to Ken, do you reckon Dad would have taken out an insurance policy for you as well? He goes, oh, yeah, I think he has. I always get stuff from AMP. I just throw it in the bin. So that night we went scrounging through his waste paper bin, seriously, scrounging through, and we found he had more shares than I got. And he sold them and paid for his trip. See, what had happened was his letterbox had become Goliath. That was his focus on. He's waiting for God to take down Goliath, for God to supply his needs in the letterbox. And all the time, God had supplied him with stones, and he'd been throwing the stones in the waste paper basket. I'll tell you how much this affects my life. Now, today we've got quite a few people away, but there'll come a day soon when this building's not big enough. So what do? I know God has already supplied the building here in Bairnsdale. I don't know where it is, but there is a venue that's going to work and serve the next stage of our growth as a church. All my life has been in youth ministry. We will be known as a church of very significant youth ministry in this town. But we don't have it yet. But God is already working on the people that are going to carry out, the leaders that are going to carry that. See, when Jesus said the harvest is not the issue, it's the workers. He said, pray for workers, pray for stones, pray for strategies. Don't look at Goliath going down. Ask God to give you the strategy. Ask him to show you where the stones are. 5 stones set Israel free from slavery. Instead of focusing on the big thing, ask God. It's a principle that you'll find all through the Bible. This concept. If you just simply look at the story of Jesus feeding 5,000 people, Goliath was the 5,000 people, plus their kids and everyone else. That was the need. Jesus had a strategy, but he also needed a provision. It was a boy's lunch, wasn't it? That was the provision. That was the stones. That was what Jesus had to work with. And so Jesus, when he sent the disciples searching for stones, and they came back, do you know how long before that meal was prepared was the provision begun? Well, a year earlier, someone had a barley crop they sowed and then they harvested it. And someone went fishing a few days earlier and caught some fish, and a mother baked some barley things, and it was already happening behind the scenes. God was preparing the provision that would be the miracle. The miracle was not feeding 5,000 people. The miracle took place when Jesus took 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, and he broke them and he thanked God. He didn't say grace. He's thanking God because this is the provision. The miracle happened when Jesus broke the stuff. And the disciples did what the disciples could do, was just simply distribute it. They were distributing a miracle that had already begun. Everything you need, before you ever pray it, God has the answer. Every need. Every need. I want to finish with this story. That 10-year-old son of my brother, his name's David, 18 years of age. So 8 years after he went on that missions trip, he's now 18 years of age. And he's got to a place in his life where he hates his mum and dad. He hates being part of a family where his parents are not just Christians, but they lead a church. He hates the fact that other Christians have come to him and pointed a finger at him and said, you're a preacher's kid. You shouldn't do that. And he felt so criticised and so crushed because of what his mum and dad did. He started to not just hate his mum and dad, but he left home at 18 years of age. And he ran away to Sydney. Ken and Bree were living in Melbourne. He ran away to Sydney. And it just happened that Coral and I and our family, we shifted to Sydney at the same time. And it just happened that he was living just over the hill from us. And that I just happened to be running and starting a youth ministry on that part of Sydney. And I knew if I asked him to come, he wouldn't come. So I asked him to come and be an undercover reporter and report back to me what we were doing wrong and what we were doing right. So he came and no one knew his role, and he was coming to criticise what we were doing. Find fault with it. Come on, David, come and tell us what we're doing wrong. Score us on all these things. Tell us what we're doing wrong. Well, he started hanging around. He found some right things that we're doing. And we had a church camp weekend down near Wollongong. And what we planned to do for the youth that night, we'd prepared in advance. We found 40 beautiful glass little Coke bottles, those nice little shaped little miniature Coke bottles. And we got parchment paper, and we got it together as a leadership team, and we prayed and asked God to give us a prophetic word for every single youth kid that would be at this camp. So 40 young people, we wrote out what we believed was God's prophetic words over their life, and we stuck it in a bottle. And on the Saturday night of the camp, we got these 40 kids into a room. And we started giving each one a bottle with their name on it. And when we gave it to my nephew, David, he didn't just cry, he started sobbing. He didn't just start sobbing, it was from his guts. And the tears are running, the nose is running, everything's running. He can hardly breathe with the sobbing as he holds this thing in his hand. Because what I didn't know was the night before, at 1:30 in the morning, he'd been walking along the edge of the ocean, in the wet sand, in the dark, where the waves come in. And he was so angry at God and so hating God. And he screamed out to God, God, if you're real, send me a message in a bottle. Before he'd even prayed that prayer, God had provided the answer. That's how it works. And if you think that the miracle, if you think that the miracle took place when Goliath went down, you'll miss the concept that God's already provided your answers before you ever ask him for them. Let's pray. God, I thank you that you are a miracle-working God. You give us strategies. You provide things, and sometimes we overlook them because they're not the big thing we're looking at. They're tiny. They're just a cloud on the horizon when Elijah's looking for rain clouds, just a cloud the size of a man's fist, but he knew that that was enough. Help us to not overlook the provision that you've given us in the moment that will lead through to the breakthrough, that the strategy that we don't realise even is a strategy, but you've put it in place for us to follow. Show us, teach us, Lord, by your Spirit. I thank you that you're the God that answers prayers in advance before we even have prayed them. Thank you, Lord.